Okay, I'm sitting here for my first interview for this leadership interview progress project. Why don't you go ahead and first introduce yourself and then also say how old you are?
My name is BJ Thomas, and I am 34 years old,
Perfect. So this first interview is with the leader who is aged 25 to 40.
which is me.
So would you mind sharing what your leadership role is and what kind of responsibilities that role entails?
Yeah, I'm the director of Chi Alpha Campus Ministries on a local campus at the University of Georgia. And then I'm also the state director for all the Chi Alpha ministries across our state in Georgia. So on a local level, it oversees a small staff of a total of four, myself and three others, including Colin right here. And we do ministry week in and week out. So it's overseeing evangelism, outreach, different services on top of the organizational administrative roles for like a local campus ministry. So paying the bills, staying on top of constitutional stuff, that stuff. As far as the state role goes, it oversees four ministries, two properties, and about 10-ish missionaries in total, missionaries and local volunteers. So it kind of spreads across our state. We have a bigger state geographically, so spreads across our state and pretty much the four different quadrants of our state. So it, a little bit that role is mainly administrative and organizational.
Cool. Feel free to answer this about the state director role or the campus or both, but what kind of training or preparation did you have to do for that role?
Yeah. So for a local campus director in Chi Alpha, we have a pretty standard set of requirements that you have to do. So you have to go through base ministerial credentialing. So in the Assumption of God, it's licensing. You have to go through licensing, which is a step above credentialing. And you have to go through what's called a CMIT or an internship program, where you go to another campus ministry and learn for a year. As far as training, those are kind of the two big training things. The other base requirements is you have to have a bachelor's degree, so you can't just go in out of high school and do it. And then for the state role, it was more of just time on task, I guess is probably the best way to say it. So you have some base training for going to a local campus, and the state role has been more just you've done a local campus work enough times, so you understand how to do statewide.
Did that training leave you feeling adequately prepared for those tasks, the different things you had to do?
Oh no, no, not at all. I think in ministry at least, every context is different, right? So the context here at the University of Georgia is a vastly different context than where I did my internship, which was at Columbus State. Great example about that is at Columbus State, it's lower income, more residential students, commuter students from the local town. So we would throw, they would throw this big burger bash where they would just hand out 1,000 hamburgers, and students would line up for an hour or two to get a free lunch. You come to UGA, where most of our students are from middle upper class, metropolitan Atlanta students. Almost all of them are on the meal plan, which is, as Colin knows, 5 dining halls, which are all much better than any cooking that you could do at home. We've tried to give out food at different times. It just flopped. So I think the idea of like understanding your context, applying some of those truths has been a thing, but I feel like adequately trained is not. That's why I say I think time on task matters so much in our context, maybe not ministry as a whole. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Kind of shifting away from the more tangible, more practical side of it, how prominent or influential was the voice and prompting of the Holy Spirit in leading you to step into those leadership roles?
Yeah, absolutely. I always say there's a verse in Acts that I always think is super powerful, where they're basically choosing to replace a disciple, and they go through this whole process. And their understanding of choosing disciples up to that point had been Jesus coming and being like, follow me. And then on the flip side of that, there is this layer where at that point, after that, they're trying to pick a disciple and they just say that us and the Holy Spirit agree on that. And I think to me, I think that has been the reality of so much of my life is it's not been so much like this tangible, audible voice of God coming in and being like, follow me and do this. It's been more just like praying about it and being like, hey, like I feel like the Holy Spirit actually like is pushing me towards this and is allowing me to do this. If that makes sense. So I'd say, I mean, if you talk about the prompting of the Spirit, I think so much of it has been that. I grew up in a Pentecostal context. So like it was very much like that was a very common, theme for my life, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Kind of going off of kind of stepping into like a subtle prompting and kind of going off of the training background, what are some of the challenges that you've had to face in those leadership roles?
I think one of the bigger ones for me has been just figuring out who you are. I think you read all this like leadership stuff, you read all these things about what it means to be a leader, what it means to be a Christ follower, what it means to be a Christian leader, all this. But so much of that at the same time is not like it's not necessarily you. And so figuring out who you are has probably been the biggest hurdle is like you read something, and there's some truths that are universally applied, but in terms of like Colin knows this about me as well as like I didn't know that I wasn't a very affirming individual from like a leadership standpoint until I started leading people. And I was like, oh crap, I like don't know how to tell people that they're doing a good job. And it's not because I don't think people are doing a good job. It's just I didn't grow up in a world where that was like a thing. It's very much like be better, figure out ways to be better and kind of improve that direction. So I think for me, I think that was probably the biggest thing is figuring out who I was, figuring out what are the things that I need to change, what are the things I need to improve on, and then, doing that.
That kind of reminds me, there's a book we're reading for this class called Embracing Followership. And he talks about how, like, a lot of times we forget that leaders are also just people. And it's like the problems and the challenges that they had before they were leaders didn't go away.
Yeah.
Like they probably got accentuated. So a lot of it is like, how do we as like people under them kind of like, when they notice stuff like that, how do we help them walk through it and like improve in those areas instead of just being like, well, you're really bad at affirming, so you're a bad leader.
Yeah.
More of like in helping them grow, we're also helping us grow and the organization grow. So when you've had challenges like that or moments like that where you realize that there's like a deficiency, were there any lessons from the past training or the past preparation that you pulled from for those moments?
Yeah. I think I think one of the best things that you can do to improve and whatever you want to put there, whether that's an individual, pastor, a leader, spiritual individual, whatever, is kind of growing from the failures of others. Like I'm a big proponent that you don't have to fail to understand something. You can learn from other people's failures and grow from that. I think that was probably some of the biggest things that I took away from training was not necessarily like things I took away, but things I've watched other people struggle through. So ways that I saw people handle other people and being like, oh man, if I don't change, that's going to be my reality. And I need to fix that and to switch that up because if I don't change that, like I'm going to walk down the same roads that they're walking down. And that's something I don't want. I think one of the biggest things, there's a quote that I'm sure you probably have read that I'm sure is probably in the class that leaders are readers. And I think that's probably been one of my biggest takeaways is just creating a discipline of growth. So it's not so much I'm just reading a book just to read a book, but I'm reading a book because this is a book that applies to me and I want to grow in a certain area. And so I'm going to read this and I'm going to apply it. And I think that's probably been my big takeaways from training stuff.
What's been probably the most significant book that you have read with that kind of mindset?
There's a bunch of really good ones. There's a really good book called Life Together by Dietrich Bonhoeffer that is like, I think people who talk about Dietrich Bonhoeffer talk about the plus grace and all like that kind of stuff. But he wrote a really good book that I think gets overlooked about how the Christians should live with one another. I think that that's probably been the most formidable because I did not come from a very hospitable like family. And it's not like disparaging. Like my dad and mom were both like first, second, third generation pastors. So like I think there's a layer of distrust and anxiety that comes with that, where it's I don't want to let people too far in because we've been stabbed in the back or we've had like the board turn on us or this or that. So I think growing up, we were naturally like, we didn't invite people over a lot, didn't do a lot of that stuff. So there was a layer of community that I never fully understood until I read that book. I think it's just been super formidable for me as a Christian, me as a follower of Christ. There's been some good books outside of that, but I think that's probably been the biggest one.
Nice.
Mhm.
My to be read pile is continuing to grow, so I'll
Yeah.
add that one on there.
Yeah.
One more question about challenges as a leader.
Mhm.
What would you say has been the hardest moment you've experienced as a leader?
Oh yeah, I bar none, the hardest moment was you don't realize all the this is a culturally heated word, so I don't mean it in all the ways that it comes across, but you don't realize all the like anxieties and worries and doubts and fears and like I want to say prejudices, but I don't mean like in the typical like racial side or the gender side, but like you don't realize all the things that you naturally are like, oh, I didn't realize I naturally had that feeling or that anxiety towards somebody or something. And I remember there was a moment where I work with college students where the student texted me and I sat down with them and for an hour and a half, they opened up a notebook and just said every single thing that they thought I was doing wrong in ministry. And I remember sitting there halfway through it and I'm just like, at the time they were 18 years old. You have no experience in ministry. You come out of a church background that doesn't like you haven't really grown up doing anything. And I was like, and there are all these like sides of me that I'm like, you just don't understand. And I think that was probably the hardest moment because it's not just conquering those like things that creep into your mind, like self-doubt, fear, worry, but it's also overcoming those things that you've been raised to be like, oh, like that religious background isn't as smart as you, or that person doesn't know as much, or that person is just that type of person. And you have to kind of remember walking through that was really difficult because it wasn't just overcoming what they said, it was overcoming who they were. And I think that those two things together were really, really difficult.
Yeah. How did you feel the Holy Spirit empowering and working in you to handle those types of challenges?
Yeah, I mean, that's something you can only do. I mean, in a Pentecostal background, I think you can easily say this. I think in a realistic background, though, it's like those, that's where the fruit of the Spirit is the most relevant, right? So it's like when you read about the fruit of the Spirit, the understanding is like, that's not stuff that we can just naturally produce. Like I don't naturally like secrete patience and just I'm like, oh yeah, here I am. So it's like those things where it's like in those moments, it's like, Lord, I don't have the long suffering. I think King James has long suffering, which is such a good word. I don't have the long suffering to deal with this. So I need you to be here with me and to help me get through this. And I think that that's a reliance on the Spirit kind of thing. We have to do that.
So we spent a good bit of time talking about challenges, but on the other more positive side of that coin, what would you say are some of the rewards or some of the highs of your time in leadership?
Oh yeah. I think a few big ones. Colin is one. So like this isn't like a brag on YouTube about Colin thing, but when we first started, Colin was one of our first few students in Path. Some of the big moments were some of those original students worked with us in ministry and are working with us now. Him, if you support missionaries, you should support him. in ministry now. I think that's a huge win because it's, we preach about disciples making disciples who make disciples, and it's like that side where it's like actually happening. Um, there was one student who, in particular, that I think is one of the biggest victories, where it was an international student who got baptized through our discipleship, but got baptized at a local church. And it was the truest form of baptism, where it was someone who was truly turning their back on their family, their religion, but who had made the reality that Jesus was more than worth any of that. I think that those are the big victories that you hold on to and you cling to, where it's not, it's the things you preach about that you do actually happening. But on the flip side, it's things that only God can do that also happens.
This may be the same answer
Mhm.
to this question, but what would you say is your favorite moment you've had as a leader?
I think those are the big tenures. Singular moment. If I had to pick one singular moment, I don't know if I could. I don't know. There's a bunch of them. A lot of baptisms, a handful of salvations that were just special. I remember one. There's one. It just stands out to me because it was recent. We had a student who I don't even know if you know the story. We have a student who is terrible, just the worst. Not bad. Let me rephrase that. That's not the right word. He's the exact opposite of all the fruits of the spirit, I feel like, kind of thing. And we preached to him all sorts of stuff in discipleship.
I don't know what that was.
It's a celebration. We preached to him all sorts of stuff in discipleship, and it's one of those people that you're like, this is going in one ear, not the other. And he came up to me literally like 2 weeks ago and said, hey, I have to show you something. And he showed me a picture of his mom getting baptized, who has been with literally like a woman at the well style lifestyle. And he was like, yeah, he's like, I was telling her about all the things I was learning, and she started going to church, and then she gave her heart to the Lord, and then she got baptized. It was just one of those moments where it was like, I don't know, like right now it's probably my favorite moment because it's like, oh man, like all the time we pour into somebody is not worthless, even though it feels that way. And that's probably the big one right now. There's a lot of other big ones that right now is probably the big one.
Nice. Yeah. That's a good one. We still got time. What have you learned about God while serving as a leader?
Oh man. He is who he says he is. I think it's probably the biggest thing. That's been my big kind of MO for the past few weeks is like, God says he's a healer, so he's going to heal somebody. God says he's a provider, so he's going to provide. God says that he is going all these things, and so he's going to do those. And I think clinging to those, understanding who he is, and then clinging to those has been the big thing.
That's good. We got time. One last question. What advice would you give to somebody my age who's working to step into a leadership role?
The spiritual stuff, I think is true. Follow the Lord, listen to the Holy Spirit, follow his guidance. I think my biggest thing for a young person for your age is there is no such thing, they might disagree with this, but there is no such thing as balance, in my opinion. There is no way that you're like, I'm going to have at your age especially, I'm going to do this, this, and this, and I'm going to have this perfectly laid out life. But I think the side of it is the best thing is make sure that the lack of balance is skewed towards productive, like improvement. So don't be like, oh man, I don't have balance. I'm going to stay up all night, like playing Xbox or doing this or doing that. But be like, I'm going to stay up all night reading, because I didn't get to my reading in the day. I'm going to read now. That's probably the big thing for me is like, don't hold tightly to that, but focus in more.
Well, that was my last question, and that's our time, so
Swag.
thanks for answering these questions, thanks for sitting down with me.
Absolutely. Thank